Welcome to our final session for ACCA P3. Have been working our way through the entire set of notes, and we have reached, or we've nearly reached, the end of chapter 14, and then we're going to have chapter 15. So just to remind you the situation that we've got to as far as chapter 14 is concerned, because chapter 14 is one of the big sessions. It's one of the big chapters from the point of view of being examined. We said we need to run our project properly. In the exam, you get a company which is trying to reduce its costs by doing something cheaper, or trying to increase its revenue by doing something better, and it says this is what we're doing now, this is what we want to change it to, and they manage the project to get from here to here. They manage it poorly, and they end up basically wasting time, wasting money, often with something that doesn't actually work properly. So project management is about changing to make the organisation better, and we said there are a number of stages you go through. Initial screening: is the project needed? Risk assessment: have we thought of all the things that might go wrong and done something about them? If there are too many things that might go wrong, should we avoid the project? Should we avoid those risks by not doing the project at all? We then need to think about who's going to be on... Sorry, I'm lying to you. We then need to think about a business case. We need to do a financial justification that the project is actually worthwhile. And if you remember, Ward and Daniels say there are only certain benefits that you are allowed to put in. Then, having done our initiation document that sets out everything that we've already talked about, we then look at our team and we think project sponsor, the client, project manager, who's going to run it, project team, who are going to be the members who are actually going to get the work done. And at that point, the project begins. During the life of the project, there are going to be a number of issues, and one of them is potentially going to be what happens if we start running out of time, and we talked about what you should do. If it's an internal project for an internal client, probably the best thing to do is just take longer, do it all, do it properly, just take a bit longer. If it's for an external client, so you cannot change the deadline, you might have to change the quality, you might have to change the scope, but most likely you'll simply have to put more resources on it and spend more than the budget to keep the client happy. Finally, if we're doing a project, to improve sales or to improve awareness or whatever it happens to be, there are going to be some benefits, but we have to make sure we actually get those benefits. They don't happen on their own. And so we finished with the idea of benefits realisation. Somebody's job is to make sure we get the benefits we're expecting to get. Now, if I can get that to move, there we go. At the end of the project, there are two very, very, very important reviews. One of them is obvious, one of them is less obvious, and they are both extremely relevant to you in your studying. Right. The post-implementation review. The post-implementation review says, this is what we were supposed to do. This is what we have actually achieved. And if we haven't achieved what we were supposed to, then we need to fix it. So the idea is that there is a project, we've done something and there's some problems with it. A typical project that we get in the P3 exam, we often get some kind of IET. You may remember when we did Harman, we talked about software packages and we talked about bespoke computer programs. A bespoke computer program is one that's written especially. And a common exam question to do with chapter 14 is to say we've had a computer program that's been written and it's got some problems with it. It's often linked to what we said in chapter 11. You may remember when we did chapter 11, we said you need to specify the functional requirements. What exactly is the project, what exactly is the computer program going to do? In chapter 14, they haven't done that. And so what happens is they end up with a computer program that doesn't do what it's supposed to. So post-implementation review, are there any problems with it? And fix them. Another common thing that you get a lot in P3 is you've written a computer program that's something to do with the internet to let users access something, and it doesn't work with a particular browser. So it doesn't work with Mozilla Firefox, it doesn't work with Google Chrome. It works with Internet Explorer, but it doesn't work with something else. Post-implementation review, identify that as a problem, fix it. Now, post-implementation review is fairly straightforward. There's a problem, we need to fix it. Post-project reviews. Now, post-project reviews, in a way, are much, much, much more important. And the idea is that you identify what went wrong, and then you think, how can we avoid making the same mistake again? So a post-implementation review, this is wrong, fix it. A post-project review, this was wrong, how do we make sure we do not make the same mistakes again? So we had a computer program, it did not do what the users needed it to, fix it. Post-implementation review. Post-project review, how do we avoid that again? Before we start writing the program, let's ask the end users what it is they actually need. Also, as part of a post-project review, you can also think, what did we do well? What did we do well so that we can do that again? Now, the reason why this is important, and this is particularly important when you're thinking about revision, when you're thinking about practicing questions, because I know what you're like, same as I was when I was a student. Students are always the same. I was exactly the same. You do an exam question, and then you have a go at the exam question, and you turn to the back of the revision kit or whatever, and you look at the answer, and you think, well, I got that bit right, and I got that bit right. I got that bit wrong, I'll just correct that bit. I got that bit wrong, I can see I got that bit wrong. I got that bit wrong, I got that bit right. You do a post-implementation review, and you say, I got that wrong, I can understand, I can see why, I got that right, I got that right, I got that right, I got that right. That's great. How is that going to help you in the exam? Because in the exam, you're going to see a question you've never seen before. This is not like some of the other papers, and I can't tell you any names because I don't know, but I know what it's going to be like. There are going to be exam papers where pretty much you get the same questions over and over and over again, and all that changes is the numbers. P3 is not like that. With P3, the questions are different each time. So one of the things that you need to do when you've done an exam question, whether it's on a revision class with me or whether you're doing it at home or whatever, is you need to think, okay, I got that wrong. What can I do to avoid making that mistake again? And can I suggest to you that the main kind of things that people get wrong is they don't answer the question. Or they don't answer all of the question. They answer some of it, but not all of it. Or the question says, analyse this company, and the student writes an essay about something. So a post-implementation review, I got it wrong. I wrote an essay. Post-project, why did you get it wrong? What are you going to do to stop that from happening again? Now, I am recording this. I don't know when you're going to watch this. I am recording this, and if you're watching this, you will know that at just before we started this session, at the end of the previous session, we were talking about project management, and I said, right, let's take a break. I've had a break for about 25 minutes because I had to go and see some people, and I actually met one of my students. This has actually just happened. I met one of my students outside the recording studio. He was here to see somebody, and I said, oh, how are you? How did the exam go? And he said, I failed. And I said, okay, what happened? And he said, question 1 was okay, but I took too long on it. And then I did question 2, And I started question 3 and I ran out of time. And as I was leaving the exam hall, when they said, when they collected the answer book, I thought, I'll have a look at question 4, and question 4 was easy. And he got, I think, something like 47%. If he had stuck to his time with question 1 and he had chosen question 4 instead of question 2, he would have passed. So he said to me, and this literally has happened 10 minutes ago, he said to me, I'm going to pass next time. If he does a post-project review, he will pass, because he will think, why did I spend too long on question 1, and I need to make sure that doesn't happen when I resit the exam. Why did I choose the wrong exam question? Because question 4 in the exam that he set was actually pretty easy. Question 2 in the exam he set was actually quite hard. He chose the wrong question. Why did he choose the wrong question? And make sure he doesn't do it again next time. So can I please make it very clear to everybody, when you are practicing questions, as I say, whether you're doing revision with me or you're revision on your own, do a post-project review. Don't just say, I got it wrong. Don't just say, I took too long on part A. Don't just say, I ran out of time on question 1. Why and what are you going to do about it? It's one of the most powerful things that you can learn at the P papers. It's one of the most powerful things that a company can learn to improve in the future. Okay then. That leads us on to chapter 15, change and development. Chapter 15 is looking at things rather than projects where there's a beginning and an end. And it's easy to say what the objectives are, and it's easy to say what the standards are. Chapter 15 is looking at things that are perhaps more difficult to identify what exactly you're going to do. So the sort of thing that we're looking at in chapter 15, the sort of things we might have, looking at things like changing the strategy of an organisation. So, for example, if you wanted to go from being a cost leader to being a product differentiator, or the other way around, going from a differentiator to being a cost leader, that's not really a project. That isn't going to have a beginning and an end and definite objectives and definite standards and a definite deadline. How long is that going to take? So this is the sort of thing we're looking at in chapter 15, things that take longer. Changing the culture. Again, what exactly are your objectives if you're going to change the culture? It's a difficult question to answer. If you can be very specific, my objective is this, and this, it's probably project management. If your objective is, then you're probably talking about change management. One of the examples that I give with my students is I say, P3, what's your objective? Pass the exam. P3 for you guys is a project because there's a beginning, there's an end, and you know now what you have to do. Get 50% in the exam. And then I say to my students, I say, has anybody got any children? And it's usually a few people who have. I said, what's the most important thing when you're raising a child? What are your objectives? And of course, they can't answer that question because it's an impossible question to answer. Right, well, that would be change management then. Raising a child isn't a project. Raising a child would be change management. So the sort of things we get in the exam are things like changing the strategy, changing the culture, or another thing we get fairly regularly is post-acquisition. So we have decided in chapter 7 that we're going to make an acquisition of an organisation. We have to manage that acquisition properly. Otherwise, all that will happen is we'll have ended up spending a lot of money for a company that doesn't do us any good whatsoever. These are the sort of areas that change management gets used in P3. In real life, it can be used for a lot more, but in P3, it's these kind of areas. Right, let's have a look then at some of the models that we've got and some of the theories that we've got. First of all, Johnson and Scholes, this is only worth a mark or two in the exam, usually, to be honest with you. And it's simply that so that you can say what kind of change we're going through. Basically, Johnson & Scholl say, are you making minor changes or are you making major changes? Are you doing something that is fundamentally different? Changing strategy is a fundamental change. Changing culture, post-acquisition, fundamental changes. These are the kind, fundamental changes are the kind we normally get in the exam. Secondly, are we going to make them gradual, I'm running out of colours, or are we going to make them suddenly? Now, based on those four combinations, you've got four classifications. The ones that we are particularly interested in is we're particularly interested in fundamental changes that happen suddenly or that happen gradually, mainly the bottom one. Now, fundamental changes, you need to do something very, very different to what you've done in the past. You need to do it quickly. Now, when do you tend to get these kind of situations? I would suggest to you that that's often question one. Why do you need to change something quickly? Because things have changed in the outside world and you need to do something about it. Evolutionary changes, you perhaps were more likely to have maybe in question, you could have it in question one, but it more likely maybe be in question 2, 3 or 4. You could have a company that started its strategy doing this and it's gradually changed over the years to doing something different. The example I give with students, the example I'll give to you is Virgin. If I ask you what industries Virgin is involved in, you will say things like airlines, trains, they have a chain of gyms, they also do things like broadband, they have just last year taken over a bank. So airlines, trains, gyms, broadband and banking. If you had asked me as a student when I was studying, and this is 20 years ago now, 25 years ago now I started, if you'd have asked me what Virgin did, I would have said airlines, record stores, a record label, vodka, they made vodka. My list would be different to yours. There'd only be one industry that would be in common, that's the airlines. Everything else that I knew Virgin doing, they stopped. And the things that you know them as doing, they've started. They're a very different company to what they were 25 years ago. But they've taken 25 years doing it. So gradual changes. You get that in question one a bit, sometimes in the optional questions, but the main thing is revolution. Now, the thing with revolution, as far as the exam is concerned, notice fundamental changes might be needed because of the outside world, and the examiner loves the outside world changing. We said that in chapter 3 and chapter 4. But although these changes are needed, because they are sudden, people won't like them, and they might be difficult for you to actually get them to accept. It might be difficult for you to get the workers to accept that change is needed, because you're going to have to change things very quickly and they just won't like it. Now, that's what you often get post-acquisition. You buy a company and you need to change it relatively quickly so that you can get it to do what you want it to be doing. Now, an example of this, and I didn't look at the exam questions in this one, I'm going to go back to this. June 2014, you had a company called Reinc. And Reinc had a very successful product. They basically, what they did was they used recycling technology to be able to use a reusable printer cartridge for a laser printer. And they had a very good product, and they had a very good group of workers. The trouble was they didn't really have any money. It was owned by one person, and he wasn't particularly well off, and the management of the company was very poor. And so what happens in June 2014's question is a venture capitalist company comes along. In part A of the question, they say, is Reinc a company we want to invest in? And it turns out the answer is yes. They've got a lot of strengths going for them. And in part B, it says, right, well, if we give Re-Ink some money, if we inject some money into Re-Ink, we want to change things, and we need to change things quickly, because Re-Ink was on the verge of going out of business. They didn't have, I think they had enough money to pay the next month's salary to everybody, and then that was it. They might not even have had that. They needed to change quite a lot of things very, very quickly. And so before the venture capitalist company invest, they're not going to invest and then try and change Re-Ink and the change doesn't work. The workers say, we're not going to do it. They'd be wasting their money. So before they do that, they basically say, if we need to do changes, would they be accepted by the workforce? Now, the trouble is, the changes are being forced on the company for various reasons, and they need to be made quickly. Now, the model that you use is by a pair of writers called Balogun and Hope Haley. The clue in the question, the clue in the requirement, is the examiner is going to talk about what are called contextual features. If he says contextual features, he means this model. Now, Balogun and Hope Haley say, right, you need to change things. You need to change things. You may need to change them quickly. Will the workers accept what you're going to do? In the case of Re-Ink, if the venture capitalist company put lots and lots of money in and the workers turn around and say, well, we're not doing that and we're not doing this, the venture capitalist company is basically wasting its time and its money, so they shouldn't bother. So Balogun and Hope Haley say, will the workers agree with what you want to do? And they divide the list. There's 8 different things that you need to think about, and they divide the list into 2 parts. One part is from the point of view of the venture capitalist. It's from the point of view of the people who are putting the money in. The other point of view is the people who are going to be working for the company that's going to get the money. Now, in the notes, I've done an example using an acquisition. So the first 4 relate to the purchasing company, and the second 4 relate to the company that is being purchased. It's exactly the same idea. The only thing is you need to work out which group want the changes to happen and which group might say no. The first 4 are for the group that want the changes to happen. The second 4 are for the group that might say no. That's it. So first of all, time. Normally, sudden changes are difficult. Gradual changes are easier. So if you can possibly change things slowly, that is better. Now, in the case of Re-Ink, they needed a cash injection, basically to keep the payroll going, but fundamentally, they didn't need to change things that quickly. They had a couple of problems with management, but overall the products were good, the workers were good. They could change things slowly if they needed to. That's more likely to work. Now, in other companies that we've had in the exam, they've had to change things really, really, really quickly, and it probably won't work very well. Capability. Do the people doing the changing, the venture capitalist company, the purchasing company, do the managers there have knowledge of change management? Have they dealt with it before? In the exam, the examiner will tell you. He will say something like, the company who are going to be doing the purchasing have a track record of buying, of acquiring other companies and improving them. In the venture capitalist question, it said they have a track record of investing in companies and helping to make them better. More capability, more knowledge, obviously, is good. Or the alternative, you'll have a company who've never done an acquisition before and it just won't work very well. I don't know if you remember right back near the beginning of the course when we talked about Machine Shop. I think we talked about Machine Shop in sessions 3 and 4, and they made some acquisitions, both of which went badly. machine shop if they come and buy another company and they were thinking of buying FRG. If you remember, they'll want to start changing things, and the workers will say, look, why should we trust you? You've already made 2 acquisitions, both of which have gone badly. Why should we trust Why should we trust? Why should we do what you tell us to do? Venture capitalist company, probably okay. Power. Can you force the changes? So in other words, you don't like what I'm saying, tough. You will have to do it anyway. More is good. The venture capitalist company, if they put in a significant amount of money, they may be able to say to the workers, we've basically saved the company. Without us, you'd all have lost your jobs. You're going to do what we tell you to do, or we'll take the money out again. And finally, do they have the financial resources to be able to do this? Change is often expensive. Things get worse before they get better. So the more resources you've got, the better. And the venture capitalist company were relatively well off. They would have money to put into Reinc. Now, just remember, if you're making an acquisition, a lot of students will say in a question, the company has got money to make the acquisition. That's great. But often there is more money that's required later to improve the buildings, to improve the machinery, to improve this, to improve that. Often the acquisition price is just the start. So you need to have enough resources to be able to fund all the improvements. Now, if change needs to be done quickly, senior management have got no experience of it, they can't force any changes to happen, and they don't have a lot of money, this change is almost doomed to failure before you start. So there's no point in trying it. Or if it's an acquisition, don't make the acquisition, because you just won't be able to get things changed. If it was Reinc, the venture capitalist, if it had to be suddenly changed, etc., they would say, we're not going to invest because we can't change things quickly enough. So as far as Reinc is concerned, so far it's looking good. Now let's look at things from the point of view of the workers at Reinc. First of all, will a lot of people be affected? Fewer is better. And it turned out in the Reinc question that the main departments that needed changing were HR and marketing. The vast majority of the workers were involved in research and development, and that bit was being done absolutely fine. So the vast majority of the workers would probably be unaffected by most of the changes. Well, in that case, they're going to say, okay, doesn't bother us. If you were trying to change something that affected everybody, then they're more likely to say no. Preservation. How much are we going to keep? More is better. I don't like the way that Balogun and Hope Haley have said that, so I'm just going to put in brackets fewer changes. The more you keep, the less you're changing. Same thing in a different way. The more you keep, the less you're changing. So again, a lot of what Reinc were doing, their research, the products they've got was going to be unaffected. It was really the marketing and, as I say, the HR. Those were the problems. The vast majority of people were unaffected. The vast majority of things that they were doing was unaffected. They will say, oh, that's okay then, because they're not being affected by it. Diversity. This is the hard one. Diversity. If you have got a company where everybody is similar, they've all got similar kinds of backgrounds, they all do things in a similar kind of way, then either they will all say yes or they will all say no. Now, if they all say yes, that's great, but what you're worried about is you're worried that they're all going to say no. On the other hand, if you've got a situation where people are from lots of different backgrounds, then some of them will say no, but some of them will say yes. You need some of them to say yes. So diversity, more different kinds of people. More diversity is better because somebody's going to say yes. Now, if I give you an example of this from an old exam question, it was about an acquisition. And it said the managers of the company that was being acquired, so these are the people who are affected by the change, they had all gone through the same management training program. They had all been trained by the same people. They all shared the same culture. And then you're going to come along and you are actually going to have to change a lot of what they were doing. They're just all going to say no, because they're all similar. Now, on the other hand, if they had lots of different backgrounds and you came along and said, we're going to change something, some of them would say, oh, that's okay then. So a more diverse workforce means there's more people who will probably say yes to what you're doing. Right? Readiness. Are the workers, the key stakeholders, but particularly the workers, do they know, do they appreciate, do they understand that changes are necessary? Because if they don't understand, if they don't, why are you changing this? What's wrong with what we're doing? If they don't understand this, then they won't accept it. So more awareness is better. And we will see that again in a short while. So Balogun and Hope Haley say, if you can make the changes slowly, and you've got knowledge of change management from previous experience, and you can force people to do what you want, and you've got a lot of resources, and only a few people will be affected, and most of what they do, their jobs won't be touched at all, and you've got lots of people from lots of backgrounds, and they know that you've got to do something because otherwise the company's going out of business. Under those circumstances, change is going to be easy. Unfortunately, it's not normally as easy as that. So Balogun and Hope Haley is one of these models, again a bit like PESTLE, where you say, you told me this, it's important because I'm going to put it under that heading, and at the end you do a conclusion. Overall, the venture capital company are going to find change relatively straightforward to implement at Re-Inc, therefore they should go ahead with their investment. Or it's going to be a disaster, don't go anywhere near it. So Balogun and Hope Haley is difficult, but the good thing is there's a lot of marks for it in the exam because there's a lot of headings there, and in the exam it actually is usually pretty straightforward to identify them. Now, I was talking a minute ago about readiness for change. Do the workers realise that they need to do something different? And a model that you can use in this is the ideas of a guy called Lewin. Lewin, in his force field analysis, says, right, here's where we are now. That's what we want to change something to, whether it's changing the strategy, whether it's changing the culture, whether it's changing the business process, whatever it is, we're doing something now and we want to do something different in the future. Now, there are reasons why we need to change what we're doing. These are what he refers to as driving forces. There are reasons why we've got to do something different. But unfortunately, let's do it like that. Unfortunately, there are also what he calls resisting forces or restraining forces. I think he uses both. Which one did I use? I've used restraining forces, resisting forces, the same thing. There are reasons why the workers are going to say no. Now, if you want any change at all to happen, the driving forces have to be higher. In the diagram that I have got at the moment on the screen, no change will happen because the resisting forces are higher. And so what Lewin says you must do is you must build up the driving forces. You must say to people, I know you don't want to do this, but you have to. Now that's like the readiness for change that we were just talking about with Balogun and Hope Haley. This is often, in the exam, this is often something external. I know you don't want to change, but look, there is a new rival who's come along who is a lot cheaper than us, so we need to cut costs. I know that you don't want to do this, but the government is going to change the law and make it very difficult for us to do what we've been doing at the moment. We must do something different. You don't like it, but we have no choice. If you can build up the driving forces are now higher, the change will happen. Or the other thing that Lewin says is, can you reduce the reasons why people are saying no? Can you say to people, I know you're worried, it's going to be okay. It's actually not going to affect you as much as you think it's going to. Now, again, I can see a situation in Re-Ink, and I'm using Re-Ink as an example. If you haven't read the Re-Ink question, it doesn't matter, where people start saying, oh, the venture capitalist company is going to come and put in money and they're going to change everything and I'm worried about my job and blah, 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 blah. And they're saying, no, we don't want any changes. And the venture capitalists come along and they say, we're going to change the marketing department and we're going to change HR. We're not going to change anything else. And nobody's going to lose their jobs and blah, 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 and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. In other words, you don't need to be worried. There's no point in being worried because we're not actually going to affect. Most of you won't even know what we've done. And some of you will actually be better off. The HR was annoying a lot of people in that Re-Ink question. So we're going to change it so you're not going to be annoyed anymore. Take away why they're worrying. And if you can do one or both of those two things, then the change happens. I think that Lewin is one of the most practical models in the entire course, because obviously this is what you guys use all the time when you're trying to change somebody's opinion of something. You're trying to change somebody's opinion, you build up the reasons why they should change their opinion, or you take away the reasons why they're sticking with it. So you guys have all done this, I've done this, trying to convince somebody to do something new. So it's a very practical model. Now, Lewin's three-step process is also about change. I do apologise, I've skipped over something I just needed to mention. My mistake. Just the one word again. You might recognise that word, transformational. You saw it back in chapter 13. And remember what a transformational leader was. A transformational leader is somebody who says, this is what I want you to achieve. You go away and work out how to do it. And we said they were very good in times of change. So transformational leaders just get mentioned there again. Here are the qualities of a good transformational leader. So sorry, I should have mentioned that. It's my fault. Lewin is another useful model to use in the exam, just like the force field model. It's the same guy. So Lewin came up with both of these models. And they're both each of them is only worth, 2 or 3 marks in the exam if it's tested at all. But they're fairly easy, 2 or 3 marks. So Lewin says, right, you want change to be successful. There are 3 steps to it. First of all, what he calls the unfreeze stage. And the unfreeze stage is simply saying, yes, I accept change is needed. Yes, I am ready to change because I know that what's going on is wrong. You can use the force field model there. So Lewin is basically saying exactly the same as Balogun and Hope Haley. You can't really force people to change. They have to accept that change is needed. That's the unfreezing stage. The second stage is where you do the change, and we will use the ideas of Johnson and Scholes in a few minutes to say how you can do that. Now, what Lewin is saying here is somebody needs to decide what we're going to change. And Johnson and Scholes in a minute are going to talk about who should be doing the deciding, who should make that decision. And the final stage that Lewin talks about is he talks about what he calls the refreeze stage. And the refreeze stage is very, very, very important, and it often gets forgotten which is why many changes don't actually work very well. Now, the refreeze stage is basically you make it difficult for people to go back to what they were doing originally. Because what everybody would like to do is they'd like to go back to what they've always done. So the refreeze stage says, make it very difficult for people. Make it so they have to carry on doing this new thing, because otherwise they'll go back to what they've always done. Now, as an example of this, a few years ago, it's about 10 or 11 years ago now, every new year I'd said, right, this year I'm going to get fit. This year I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to lose weight, but it never happened. I would go to the gym for a couple of weeks and then like everybody else I'd forget about it. And I thought to myself one year, no, this year I really do want to get healthier. So what I will do is I'll enter to run a marathon. So I actually entered January the 1st. I did an online entry form for the Berlin Marathon, which is usually run in September. So I had 9 months to get ready for it. So that's plenty of time to get ready for it. And I thought, you know what? So I knew I had to get healthier. That's the unfreeze stage. And I thought to myself, you know what will happen is I'll start training for a little while and then I'll get fed up with it. And I'll get bored with it and I'll just go back to what I've always done. So I will change for a while. I'll start running and for a while I'll be good. And then I know what I'm like. I'll go back to what I've always done. So what I did on January the 2nd is I phoned up all my family and I phoned up all my friends and said, I'm doing the Berlin Marathon in September, will you sponsor me? And by the end of January the 2nd, I had about £500 in sponsor money from my mum, from my sister, from my brother, from friends, blah, blah, blah. Why did I do that? Because I can't now back out. I can't say, actually, you know, I'm not going to do it. I had to go ahead and do it. And so I put myself in a position where I couldn't go back to being lazy. And so I actually trained for 9 months for this marathon and I ran it. I completed it. I know this is a very sad thing to say, I actually quite enjoyed it. But if I hadn't have phoned up people and got them to sponsor me, I know what I would have done is I would have said, can't be bothered. The refreeze stage is very important and people don't think about that. So you want to make sure that changes will be permanent, not temporary. So Lewin's model is quite useful. The force field model fits in with getting people to accept that change is needed, getting them ready for change. The second stage we're going to look at with Johnson and Schultz. The third stage is making sure they don't go back again. Johnson and Schultz then. They say that there are 5 different ways that you can get change accomplished. 5 different ways you can get it accomplished. Participation is involving people. I've got employees, but it's basically whoever is being changed. Get them involved directly in the decision making. So in other words, you accept that we need to change something. Together, you and I, let's agree what we're going to change, how we're going to change, how long it's going to take, etc. Let's make all of those decisions together. And the reason why Johnson and Schultz recommend this is because obviously if the workers come up with their own ideas, they can't really then turn around and say, no, we're not going to do it. It was your idea. So they're more likely to accept the ideas because it was their ideas in the first place. Participation is good, but it takes a long time. So another possibility is coercion. And coercion simply means, I'm going to tell you what to do. I have decided what we're doing. You're going to do it because I tell you to do it. Now, the workers might not like that, but at least has the advantage that it's quick. And remember, we might be in a situation where we need to make revolutionary changes which are sudden, and we may not have time to do participation. Participation is going to take a long time. Maybe we haven't got time to do that. I've decided, get on and do it. Now, there'll be some workers who won't care about that. They're quite happy just to be told what to do. There'll be some workers who won't like that. So one of the things, which of these two is better, to a certain extent, it depends on the workers. If the workers are quite happy to be told what to do, then just tell them. If you know you're going to upset the workers and that's a big deal, that's going to be important, then maybe you should get them involved. Maybe you're going to upset the workers and you don't really care. So you've got participation and coercion. The other one I would mention is education. Education, I have decided what's going to happen, but I will explain it to you. I will explain what we're doing. I'll explain why it is necessary. I will explain how it is going to affect you. And again, the idea behind that is it's relatively quick because I've decided, but on the other hand, again, hopefully you will accept it because I'm at least taking the trouble to explain to you what's going on. Now, when I was at KPMG, they went through a very big restructuring. They fundamentally changed the way they did things. They fundamentally changed the way they were organised. And this happened in London. I don't know if it happened in other parts of the country or other parts of the world. I honestly don't know. But the way that KPMG had been organised, you had an audit department, you had a tax department, you had a consultancy department, and the auditing department obviously did the audits, tax did tax, blah, 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 fair enough. But KPMG decided it would be better to have a department that had a mixture of all those people, but concentrated on particular kinds of clients. So you had banking departments, and the banking department would audit banks, give tax advice to banks, do consultancy for banks. And that's all they would do. They would specialise in one kind of client, telecommunications. So we audit phone companies and we do tax advice for them and we do consultancy for them. And the idea was that you would be able to supply a better service to the customers because your staff would concentrate on just doing one thing, and also they would all be working together. Now, I worked in an audit department. On the next floor of the building was the tax department. I never met any of them. Even though often they'd be doing tax for the same clients I was auditing them. I think I would have recognised maybe two of them. We just worked completely separately. And that actually doesn't seem like a very sensible idea. So KPMG changed the way that the teams, the ways the departments were put together. And this is what they did. They did education. They had a series of meetings where they explained what was going to happen, and then they had basically a roving microphone. So people could stand up, and all the staff were invited, most senior to the most junior, stand up, what's this going to mean, blah, blah, blah. And they had phone lines where you could phone up and say, how's this going to affect me, blah, 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 blah. It was managed very, very, very well. And it actually went very, very smoothly. The fact I left at the same time may have had something to do with it. Right. The business change life cycle. The business change life cycle was added into the syllabus in June 2014. And all that the business change life cycle basically says is, although I've been talking about projects having beginning and ends and change, but the idea is that change is never really finished. As soon as you've changed something, you need to start looking again at the next things to change, because it takes so long. Change might take 2, 3, 4 years, and by the time you change, you're ready for the next change. So first of all, things force you to change. You decide what you're going to improve using the POP-IT model, which we will get to in a minute. You think about which business processes need changing. You think about which stakeholders need to participate, which stakeholders need to be educated, and which stakeholders you can just tell what they're doing. You make sure that somebody is in charge of benefits realisation, so you get all the benefits that you're going to do, and at the end of that, you're probably going to have to start the whole cycle again. The POP-IT model says simply, when you're thinking about what do you need to change, there are 4 headings. People, Chapter 13. Structure, Chapter 13. The processes that you do, Chapter 11. And the IT that you use, Chapter 12. So all that POP-IT says is, when you're thinking about what needs to change, look at those 4 headings. Now again, in the exam, this is going to be like PESEL. You told me this about the people, this is how it's going to affect them, I put it under that heading. You told me this about the IT, this is what's going to change, put it under that heading. It's just going to be like PESEL, to be honest with you. So the big thing with this model is it accepts that change is never finished. As soon as you've changed, you need to start again. And that links in very well with the final thing that we've got as far as the notes are concerned. Remember, we began back in chapter 1 by talking about strategy. And we said the idea is that strategy is long term and you're trying to gain an advantage. Some strategies work. The idea is that you do chapter 2 through to 5, you analyse things. You do chapter 6 up to 9, you get options and you choose one and you implement it and it's all successful. But in many cases it doesn't work like that at all. Some strategies fail. In the exam, that's quite common. Somebody is trying to do something and it doesn't work and you have to say why. You might remember we had that with Frigate Limited and had a strategy to change the way that people were working and it didn't work. We had to say why. Imposed strategies, you get this a lot in question 1. The outside world has changed, there is a recession, there is a new rival, there is a new technology. You must do something new. Strategic drift. What you are doing was fine 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, but the outside world has now changed and what you're doing does not fit in with it anymore. Imposed and strategic drift are similar. With both of them, you're doing something wrong. I suppose the difference is imposed, it's sudden. Strategic drift, it's happened gradually. But with both of them, you now need to do something different. So the idea is you get to the end of chapter 15 and you've analysed things, you've chosen strategies, you've implemented them. Either they haven't worked, in which case you need to go back to chapter 1 and start again, or they have worked, your organisation has become even more successful. Your stakeholders will expect even more success. You have to go back to chapter 1 and start the whole thing again. So what comes after chapter 15? The answer is chapter 1, because you go back in a circle. You start the whole thing again. And I think that's one of the useful things about the business change life cycle model. It in effect shows you the fact it says life cycle, this is a never-ending process. It just goes round and round and round and round. Strategy never finishes. Now, let's just finish off just with a very quick look, because we're not going to have very long to look at this, I'm afraid. A very quick look at a question from December 2010. This is question 4. Same exam paper as the Frigate Limited question. This was the final question on the same exam. And it illustrates the kind of thing that the examiner likes. It says, evaluate the benefits and costs of doing something. Where is the answer going to be? The answer is going to have to be in the question. So, for example, it talks about the fact that you've got exam centres all over the world. What they are thinking of doing is they're thinking about basically moving away from that and having exams that are done on a PC. Well, that means that they could save money. They wouldn't have to have 320 exam centres all over the world. Half the centres, you've only got 10 people doing the exams. So you've got exam centres with invigilators. You've got to rent the rooms, the exam centre. You've got to have invigilators. You've only got 10 people there. Doing it on a computer, people can do it from home. So there are benefits if we are going to be doing that. Also, the fact that the exam is only twice a year, it says cash flow is difficult. If you had exams constantly, you wouldn't have this big cash flow issue. You'd have a steady trickle of cash. It says that they've incurred $350,000 bank charges. Again, if you had a steady flow of cash, you wouldn't get those. Now, you notice the examiner is saying what is going wrong. E-assessment is going to help solve those problems. So the examiner is simply saying, what am I telling you? Tell me what's wrong. Tell me how this is going to be a solution. Now, there's going to be a lot of benefits. Costs will go down in certain areas. Invigilation costs will go down, rental costs will go down, cash flow management will be better, so interest costs will go down. But of course, there'll be other costs instead. If you let people do an exam over the internet, there's going to be security costs because people could hack into the system. There may have to be more cost checking that it's actually the candidate that is going to be sitting the exam rather than somebody else. Now, I think this is a good example. The benefits, this is based on what it says in the scenario. It's got a lot of problems in the scenario. E-assessment would help. The costs are much more your own ideas. Now, so the idea is that you apply your knowledge to the scenario and you come up with the benefits. You apply your common sense, come up with your own ideas, you come up with the costs. But you notice, and the reason I wanted to look at this question at the very end, you notice what it does not say. It does not say in part A, explain what e-assessment is. It does not say, write an essay about why e-assessment might be good. It says, what are the benefits to this organisation? What are the likely costs for this organisation? And if you remember right back at the very beginning, in the introduction to the paper, we hadn't even got as far as chapter 1, I said to you, this is a thinking paper. This is not a learn stuff and write it out in the exam paper, which unfortunately is what lots of students think it is. Lots of students in that exam basically said e-assessment is this, and here's some examples of real life and blah, 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 and they didn't mention this organisation at all. They didn't mention the specific problems that this organisation faced. And so I had to give them very low marks because they hadn't answered the question. So it's a very practical exam, and the only way to get better is to practice it. This is not the kind of paper that you can now sit and just read and listen to me again and read and listen to me again. You need to practice questions. And I am afraid you also need to think about what you are doing, right? You need to practice having ideas about things, reading things in newspapers. Why are they doing that? They could do this instead. The more practice you get, the easier the exam is going to be. But lots of students simply say, I'm going to sit here, David, you tell me what I need to do, and I can't do that. It's not that kind of exam. So the key things that we've had in session 8, project management, which comes up a lot. Balogun and Hope Haley comes up fairly often. And I can't tell you what we're going to do in the next session because that's obviously the end of the course. But I truly, truly, truly think students who do not do revision do much, much worse in P3 because P3, it is all about practicing questions and being guided by me as to what's the important bit and what isn't. And I don't think you can get that just by having a go at a question and reading an answer out of a revision kit or reading an answer that the examiner's put on the internet. I really don't think you can do that. I'm not just saying that, but I just think practicing questions and just thinking about how you answer P3 questions is so valuable for this particular exam. So I would recommend to all of you that you do some kind of revision course with somebody. Obviously, I would prefer it is LSBF, but if it is somebody else, it's better to do that than to try and do it on your own. I don't know where you are watching this. I don't know when you are watching this. If you are somewhere near an LSBF centre, then go and do a revision course in a class. If you get taught by me, for example, every day of revision, I collect an item of work, I mark it, I give it back to you. Students say that is incredibly valuable. Not every lecturer is able to do that. Even if you can't get to a class, we do a revision class online. The only difference between that and what you're doing is obviously this is pre-recorded, you watch it when you want. The revision is live. So in other words, you get the chance to ask me questions as we go along and I can answer them. The main part of revision, if you do it with me, will be on exam technique. I'm going to assume that most of the knowledge you already know, because most of the knowledge in P3 is actually quite straightforward. It's about applying it, so it's lots and lots of question practice. If you can't get to a revision of any kind whatsoever, practice exam questions. Practice exam questions and then practice more exam questions. Do them in full, do them under timed conditions, because P3, again, it's not the sort of exam, read the question, think for 10 seconds, read the answer, I would have got that, I would have. That's not going to help you at all. One of the biggest reasons people fail is they run out of time, so you've got to practice doing them under timed conditions. I know it's not very exciting doing an exam question for an hour and a half, but that's the only way to get better. So I hope that I will have some of you coming and doing a live revision course with me at some point. I certainly look forward to that. If not, some kind of question practice is better than just learning all the notes again. Whatever you are doing, wherever you are, however long it is taking you, whatever other papers you are taking, good luck for P3, good luck for all the other exams that you are taking.